Greetings to all our viewers tuning into our channel. There are moments in a nation's history when the most crucial decisions aren't made amidst the sound of gunfire or in the life or death hours on the front lines, but quietly, behind closed doors in meeting rooms. In those rooms, there are no uniforms, no battle maps spread across the table, only thick stacks of documents, cold numbers, and signatures that appear emotionless. Yet it is precisely these moments that carry immense weight, for they silently shape how a country survives, defends itself, and stands firm for decades to come. Canada now stands at such a moment. $32 billion. That figure is not just a budget. It's a looming shadow cast over Parliament, over the entire defense architecture, and more profoundly, over the very concept of national sovereignty in the 21st century. When that number is mentioned, people often rush to ask, is the F-35 modern? Is it the most advanced fighter jet in the world? But those are the easiest questions to ask and also the most dangerous, because they distract from the core issue. The real question isn't about technical specifications or flashy promotional videos. The real question is Canada purchasing a tool for defense or signing a long-term contract that binds its strategic autonomy to decisions beyond its control? In March 2025, when Prime Minister Mark Carney called for an urgent review of the entire F-35 contract, it wasn't a symbolic political move. It was the reflex of a nation beginning to clearly sense the hidden risks lurking behind commitments that once seemed firmly locked in. More notably, the push for this review didn't come from opposition parties or domestic public pressure. It came from a cold, calculated warning issued by a country known for its caution, neutrality, and near obsession with risk management: Switzerland. When a country that doesn't belong to military alliances, avoids arms races, and scrutinizes every penny of its defense budget chooses to sound the alarm, it's no longer just a matter of technicalities or accounting. It's a sign of a systemic issue, a system that can send costs spiraling out of control, increase long-term dependency, and gradually shift final decision-making power away from the very nation using the equipment. And this is where Canada's story turns a new page. Because to understand why Mark Carney had to pause, we must look beyond Canada's borders, to the place where a sign reading "fixed price" once hung like a firm promise before it shattered. Switzerland went first. And what they uncovered wasn't just a bigger number on paper, it was a dangerous illusion that any country could fall for if it believed all risks had been accounted for from the start. Switzerland has long been an exception in the world of defense. They don't buy weapons to show off, to play power games on the global stage, or to satisfy political pressure. Every military decision made in Bern revolves around a single goal: to minimize risk to the greatest extent possible. That's precisely why, when Switzerland chose the F-35 in the 2021-2022 period, many nations breathed a sigh of relief. If a neutral country, known for its cold, calculated decision-making, had given the green light, then surely every number had been locked down, every worst-case scenario accounted for. But by 2024, that picture began to crack. Not with a loud scandal, nor with fiery political declarations, but with a rare admission. Switzerland had underestimated the true cost of a system they believed they had purchased at a fixed price. That phrase, which once sounded so reassuring inside meeting rooms, began to lose its meaning in real-world operations. Expenses not included in the original pricing quietly emerged. Maintenance, software updates, long-term combat readiness all began to add up, slowly but relentlessly. Inflation in the US, adjustments from the contractor, and sustainment costs interpreted in the seller's favor began to Switzerland's defense budget. The projected lifetime cost jumped by nearly 50%, a shock not only financially, but also in terms of trust. For a country that treats budgetary discipline as the foundation of national security, this wasn't an acceptable margin of error. It was a sign that they had stepped into a system where critical variables were no longer entirely under their control. It was at that moment that Switzerland's story moved beyond the scope of a defense contract. It became a mirror for countries heading down the same path. Canada is one of them. The numbers are eerily familiar, from $19 billion to $27 billion, and now over $32 billion. Each adjustment has its rationale, each is explained by shifting contexts, but taken together, They draw a familiar trajectory, the path of steadily escalating costs. The issue isn't whether Canada can afford it. The issue is that once fixed price no longer means fixed, where does it end? Once the budget is opened, once the project is underway, the psychological pressure of sunk costs makes backing out increasingly difficult. And at that point, every additional billion isn't just a figure on paper. It's resources pulled away from other national priorities, from people, to long-term independent capability. Switzerland saw this early enough to sound the alarm, and that warning reached Ottawa, forcing Mark Carney to ask the question that should have been raised from the very beginning. What's really hidden behind those seemingly locked-in numbers? The deeper one looks, the clearer it becomes that money is just the surface. Beneath it lies a far more sensitive issue, one that's less openly discussed, but carries vastly greater strategic weight. Because when costs spiral out of control, control over the system itself begins to fade. And that's when the next question becomes unavoidable. In a program like the F-35, how much of the system does the purchasing nation truly own, and how much is in someone else's hands? From the financial crack Switzerland uncovered, a larger fracture came into view. A fracture in sovereignty, independence, and in the unsettling realization that you're operating a system whose final key might not fully be in your pocket. Switzerland's greatest warning, in the end, isn't about ballooning budget lines or cost overrun charts. It lies in a feeling that's hard to name, but once recognized, impossible to ignore. The sense that you no longer have full control over what you've paid to own. With the F-35, the issue isn't just about price, it's about the very nature of ownership. In conventional thinking, buying a fighter jet means a country has full authority to use, maintain, repair, and operate it however it sees fit. But the F-35 wasn't designed with that logic in mind. It's not a standalone piece of equipment. It's a node within a massive ecosystem where data, software, and access are centrally controlled. Once a nation steps into that ecosystem, it no longer becomes the absolute owner. It becomes a permissioned user. The brain of the F-35 doesn't reside inside the aircraft itself, but in mission data systems and a constant stream of software updates. These updates don't just fix bugs, they determine how the plane sees, hears, and understands the battle space. And the ability to activate, approve, or prioritize these functions doesn't fully lie in the hands of the operating nation. To put it bluntly, there are things you cannot modify, repair, or even access without external approval. Imagine a very ordinary scenario. It's a cold winter morning. You walk out to your car to go to work, but the engine won't start. Not because the car is broken, but because a server thousands of miles away hasn't confirmed your access. In everyday life, that's already unacceptable. In national defense, where every minute of delay can have strategic consequences, that's a risk that cannot be ignored. For Canada, this isn't a theoretical concern. Ottawa's defense strategy is increasingly focused on the Arctic, a vast, sparsely populated region where decisions must be made quickly and independently. If there's a reconnaissance flight or signs of rising tension, Canada can't afford to wait. But in a system where data access and software updates are centrally managed, the question becomes, where does real autonomy actually lie? Even when everything runs smoothly in peacetime, international politics is always a variable. The strategic priorities of great powers can shift with each election cycle, each new crisis. Canada may be a key partner today, but tomorrow it could fall to a lower priority. In that context, dependence is no longer an abstract concept. It becomes a tangible risk, directly tied to a nation's ability to respond. $32 billion, viewed from this angle, doesn't just buy aircraft. It buys entry into a network where the rules are set by someone else. And once you're in, getting out is no longer simple. Financial cost is only part of the equation. The cost in lost decision-making power, in diminished capacity to act independently at critical moments, is the price that's hardest to quantify. But the story doesn't end there, because even if we set aside every debate about data, software, and control, one final factor remains, one that can't be explained away by presentation slides or promises in a contract. Geography. The F-35 may be a symbol of cutting-edge technology. But technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It must function in specific environments, under specific conditions, and with very real limits. And when the gleam of high-tech collides with the brutal reality of the Arctic, where wind cuts like a blade and sub-zero temperatures linger endlessly, the next question naturally arises. Was such a sophisticated system truly built to endure a land of ice and extremes? Or are we turning the Arctic into an expensive test lab, where geography may well overpower every promise technology has made? The Arctic is not an abstract idea on a map, nor is it an ideal testing ground for the polished assumptions of modern technology. The Arctic is raw, unforgiving reality. There, sub-zero temperatures don't just appear for a few days a year, they can stretch on for weeks, even months. The wind doesn't just chill human skin, it corrodes metal, thickens lubricants, and makes even the most advanced systems fragile. The Arctic doesn't care about the reputation of a weapons platform. It asks only one question: can you operate here? In that environment, the celebrated advantages showcased at defense expos begin to face a very different kind of test. Stealth, sensor fusion, complex data networks, these are impressive achievements, but they are built on the assumption of stable operational infrastructure. Hangars must be heated constantly. Runways must be maintained at the highest level. Technical crews must be large, highly trained, and ready at all times to swap out components sensitive to the cold. Each of these links consumes time, money, and energy, and each can become a point of failure when conditions are no longer ideal. For Canada, the Arctic isn't a distant battleground. It is the first line of defense, a strategic survival space where constant presence matters more than any short-term technological performance. No matter how advanced a fighter jet may be, it becomes meaningless if it spends most of its time grounded in a hangar because the environment won't allow frequent flight. In that context, power is no longer measured by sophistication, but by readiness. Canada's geography dictates a logic all its own: vast distances, sparse infrastructure, and the need for rapid response across a massive territory. That demands systems that can endure harsh conditions, be maintained in the field, and operate reliably even when everything around them is far from perfect. The Arctic doesn't tolerate solutions that are theoretically correct but practically unworkable. It forces every choice to answer one simple, unforgiving question: was this built for this land? This is where the difference becomes clear between technology optimized for controlled environments and technology built to endure. The more complex a system is, the more it relies on ideal conditions to function properly. And when those conditions disappear, the cost isn't just measured in money, it's measured in time and presence, the two most valuable resources in Arctic defense. There is no room for extended experimentation, no margin for lessons learned after the fact. But the Arctic story doesn't end with the question of which aircraft can fly in the cold. It opens a deeper, more long-term strategic question. If a country commits to massive investment in a platform that demands specialized infrastructure, complex maintenance, and high dependence, what does that say about its role in the global defense value chain? Is Canada building true self-reliance, or is it positioning itself to constantly adapt to someone else's standards? From the Arctic's harsh geography, the thought process naturally leads to another issue, no less important, but often overshadowed by technical debates: defense industry. Choosing a system like the F-35 is not just a decision about how to defend territory, it's a decision about how to participate in the global defense industry. And at that point, the question is no longer whether the aircraft can fly in the cold, but whether Canada is truly a strategic partner or just a subcontractor within an ecosystem designed and controlled by others. In every debate about the F-35, there is one argument that's consistently brought out like an unshakable shield: jobs. Numbers are delivered with confident voices, full of promises about global supply chains, about manufacturing contracts spread across the country, about opportunities for Canada to participate in the world's largest defense program. But the more closely you listen, the more necessary it becomes to calmly ask, what kind of jobs are these, and what do they actually contribute to the country's long-term capabilities? In the F-35 program, Canada's role largely lies in work share, assignments distributed by allocation. Canadian companies manufacture parts, provide services, and contribute to specific phases of a production chain, whose overall architecture, core design, and key decisions are made elsewhere. These are real jobs with real income, but without intellectual property ownership. There is no full design authority, no independent development capability, and most importantly, no guarantee those contracts will remain if the structure of the global supply chain shifts. The history of the defense industry reveals an uncomfortable truth. Work share does not create industrial sovereignty. It creates dependency. When you don't own the IP, you don't control your own future. You can't make adjustments, upgrades, or strategic pivots on your own terms. Everything must wait for signals from the program's decision-making center. And if one day the priority shifts elsewhere, those jobs can disappear as quickly as they arrived. This is even more thought-provoking when we consider Canada's actual capabilities. This is not a country lacking industrial foundations. Canada has an impressive aviation legacy, leading companies in training, simulation, manufacturing, and systems integration. Canada once had ambition, once dared to dream of nationally significant programs. And yet, in one of the most consequential defense decisions in its history, the role it has accepted is that of a bystander in the value chain, rather than a leader at the center of it. Comparisons to other countries make the question even sharper. There are nations smaller than Canada that, in defense procurement, demand technology transfer, insist on design participation, and negotiate for autonomy in maintenance and upgrades. As a result, they don't just acquire military assets, they build long-term industrial capacity, create sustainable jobs, and most importantly, retain decision-making power at home. It's not an easy path, but it's one that turns defense spending into strategic investment. With the F-35, Canada is following a different logic, one that favors short-term convenience, fast integration into a pre-built ecosystem over the slow development of independent capability. And once that logic is accepted, the question of sovereignty no longer rests solely in the skies. It lives inside factories, inside design rooms, in the ability to choose where Canada's defense industry will be 20 or 30 years from now. But the story doesn't stop at industry, because even if we accept the role of subcontractor, even if we treat short-term job creation as sufficient, there remains one unavoidable reality: budget and flight hours. The more complex and expensive an aircraft is to operate, the less it flies. And in a country as vast as Canada, where constant presence matters more than paper-perfect performance, the next question naturally arises. With the same budget, how many actual flight hours will Canada get over its own skies? And what does that say about its real-world defense capability? Not on slides, but where it matters most. In the end, every debate about technology, sovereignty, or industry must circle back to one simple, brutally practical question. In the real world, how much can Canada actually fly? Not how many features are listed on a brochure, not how many sensors are fused in a lab simulation, but how many flight hours actually happen over Canada's skies, year after year. Flight hours are the true measure of presence. They reflect how often patrols take place, how well pilots are trained, how prepared the force is to respond to the unexpected. In a vast country like Canada, where distances are measured in thousands of kilometers and entire regions are connected only by air, constant presence matters more than any promise of absolute superiority in a hypothetical scenario. The F-35 is an expensive platform to operate. Each flight hour isn't just about fuel and wear. It sets off a chain of costs that include maintenance, spare parts, and highly specialized technical personnel. When every flight hour costs tens of thousands of dollars, the natural instinct of any command is to conserve. Fly less to save money. Reduce training hours. Plan patrols more sparingly. On paper, the force remains modern, but in reality, presence starts to fade. This creates a dangerous paradox. You own one of the world's most advanced aircraft, yet hesitate every time it needs to take off. You possess top-tier technology, but lack the operational tempo to turn that technology into real deterrence. In a strategic environment where signals matter as much as actions, being seen less can sometimes be more damaging than not having high-end tech at all. Conversely, a platform with lower operating costs enables a different logic. Fly more. Show up more often. Pilots become familiar with the sky, the terrain, the rhythm of operations. The defense system is not a treasure locked away in a vault. It's a tool used daily, grounded in geography and tailored to security needs. In that scenario, strength doesn't come from perfection, but from readiness. For Canada, this isn't a theoretical equation. The defense budget has limits, and every dollar spent on flight hours is a dollar not spent elsewhere. As operating costs rise, pressure builds to cut from less visible corners. Training, spare maintenance, long-term operational tempo. A costly force that flies infrequently may look impressive in reports, but becomes fragile over time. It's precisely at this intersection, where budget meets reality, that the numbers start to tell the truth. The conversation is no longer about which aircraft is better, but which force is more present. It's no longer theory about tech superiority, but a long-term question of sustained readiness over years, even decades. And once that question is asked seriously, it demands a pause. That is why Mark Carney's decision to call for a review cannot be dismissed. Because when flight hours, budgets, and strategic reality converge, the choice is no longer whether to continue a project. It becomes a recognition that if we don't stop to reassess, the momentum of costs and commitments could carry the entire country one step further. Not toward lasting security, but toward the edge of irreversible decisions. There are moments when the true strength of a leader isn't measured by how fast they move forward, but by their ability to stop at the right time. The crossroads Mark Carney now faces isn't a technical choice between aircraft models nor a simple comparison of bids. It is one of those rare moments when a nation is forced to look itself in the mirror and ask, are we moving by momentum, or are we truly in control of the path ahead? The decision to review the F-35 contract in the end is not an act of defiance against any ally. It is not distrust, nor is it a turning away. It is an act of support for Canada in the deepest sense, putting long-term interests, strategic sustainability, and national autonomy above the pressure to just keep going. In the world of defense procurement, where projects stretch across decades and consume tens of billions of dollars, the most dangerous trap isn't the initial mistake. It's the unwillingness to correct course once too much has been invested. Mark Carney understands this well. As someone deeply familiar with massive numbers and complex systems, he knows the psychological weight of sunk costs. The more you invest, the harder it becomes to pause. The more you commit, the more fearful you become of admitting it's time to reassess. Yet history is full of examples showing that continuing down a wrong path simply because you've already walked too far is not steadfastness. It's a lack of strategic courage. The three questions he raised may sound simple, but they strike at the heart of the issue. Is Canada's infrastructure truly ready to support such a high-maintenance system? Are domestic benefits from industry to workforce secured in a sustainable way, or are they vague promises on paper? And most importantly, is national sovereignty, Canada's ability to make its own calls in critical moments, still fully intact, or is it slowly being eroded by invisible constraints? This crossroads is particularly dangerous because it lacks clear warning signs. There's no immediate crisis, no obvious failure. Everything seems to be functioning. Payments are made, progress is reported, and on paper, Canada is moving forward. But it's that very smoothness that should raise concern. Because once a project moves far enough, the choices are no longer in the hands of politicians or citizens. They're locked in by contracts, by infrastructure already built, by decisions that can't be undone. To pause in this context is not a retreat. It is an act of self-defense. It gives Canada the chance to check the map before committing to a journey that will last decades. It creates space for adjustment, for renegotiation, even for a change in course if necessary, while the doors are still open. More importantly, it sends a message. Canada will not let inertia determine its future. The crossroads Mark Carney faces is not his alone. It reflects the maturity of a nation willing to ask itself the hard questions. In an increasingly unstable world, where technology evolves faster than politics, clarity may be the most powerful weapon we have. And sometimes, to avoid falling into the abyss, the bravest thing to do is not to accelerate, but to stop, stare into the void ahead, and choose, deliberately, the path we truly want to walk. As this story reaches its final chapter, what remains is not the name of an aircraft, nor a technical spec sheet, nor a dry budget figure. What remains is a deeper, broader, and far more difficult question to ignore. What kind of nation does Canada want to be in the 21st century, especially as its strategic future becomes increasingly tied to the Arctic? The F-35 at its core is a symbol. It represents a vision of security built on cutting-edge technology, on deep integration into global ecosystems, and on the belief that power comes from standing alongside the most advanced platforms in the world. But on the other side of that symbol lies a different approach, quieter, less glamorous, but more enduring. Strength built on autonomy, geographic fit, and the ability to maintain lasting presence in the real world. The Arctic will not wait for Canada to perfect every ideal condition. Ice is melting, shipping lanes are opening, competition is intensifying, and the decisions made today will define how the country can respond for decades to come. In that space, a strong ally is not one that depends on others, but one that can stand its ground when it matters most. A confident nation doesn't need to rent the keys to its own house, nor ask permission to defend its strategic lifeline. Switzerland's warning rang out like a wake-up call. Mark Carney's review shows Canada has heard that call. But hearing it is one thing, acting on it is another. The choice ahead won't be easy, and there is no perfect answer. Every path comes with a price. The important thing is knowing what that price is being paid for short-term shine or for long-term resilience. In the end, this isn't just the story of a government or the military or defense contractors. It's the story of the Canadian people, of how a society understands sovereignty, security, and its responsibility to the future. The biggest decisions are often the quietest, but their consequences echo for a very long time. And for that reason, they deserve to be placed in the light of open, clear-eyed, and honest public debate. If you have thoughts, whether you agree, disagree, or want to add a new angle to the path Canada now stands before, share them in the comments below. Your perspective is a vital part of this national conversation. And if you found this kind of analysis valuable, don't forget to subscribe to the channel as we continue to follow, examine, and reflect on the strategic decisions quietly shaping the world we'll all live in tomorrow.